You've seen the ads. Hassle-free weight loss drugs with no doctor visit. Sound too good to be true? It is. Med spas and telehealth brands are flooding the market to cash in with knockoff compounded versions. Don't be mistaken. They're not generics and they're not FDA approved. They can come from illegal foreign sources without the safety or quality assurances of the real thing. You're not getting the full story. Learn the facts at safemedicines.org. Paid for by Partnership for Safe Medicines.
A musician with technical knowledge can play all the right notes. But one who cares enough to play from the heart gives music soul. At Truist, we believe the same is true for banking. Because when you work with someone who knows a lot and cares even more, you're unstoppable. Truist, leaders in banking, unwavering in care. Start feeling unstoppable. Visit truist.com/care. Truist Bank, member FDIC, leading based on top 10 U.S. commercial bank.
We're back with another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. I'm Emily Jashinsky, culture editor here at The Federalist. As always, you can email the show at radio@thefederalist.com. Follow us on X at FDRLST. Make sure to subscribe wherever you download your podcasts, and of course to the premium version of the Federalist website, thefederalist.com as well. I'm joined today by O.H. Skinner. O.H. Skinner is the executive director of the Alliance for Consumers, also the most recent Arizona Solicitor General. Welcome to the show, O.H. Skinner.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. What's the website for Alliance for Consumers, by the way? AllianceForConsumers.org?
It's AllianceForConsumers.org, and then it is _consumers on X, where I think we try to flag some interesting stuff for people.
Oh, super interesting stuff. I always love talking to you guys because you're up to things that I think also the corporate press doesn't pay a ton of attention to, but actually does affect the daily lives of the American people. And even though it might...
I like that you say that because that is exactly one of the things that we very much try to do is put an actual consumer and everyday face on things that mostly just get covered by, big, people who don't always understand what regular people care about.
100%. And it's not convenient to the narrative that media likes to tell about all kinds of different issues, whether it's the environment or the administrative state. So why don't we actually just start there? Could you tell us a little bit about what the Alliance for Consumers does, like some of the different projects and focuses that you guys have? Like, what are you looking at?
So we look at a couple different things. We look at how consumer protection at the government level does a pretty historically bad job of helping people. So you would see headlines of a class action settlement or your state attorney general or the CFPB doing something to somebody who arguably looked like they did a bad thing. And then you'd find out that nobody actually got a check, or if they got a check, it was 25 cents and the lawyers took all the money, or the government bureaucrat put all the money in a government bank account to pay for more government bureaucrats. And, at the end of the day, there was just no voice for consumers in that space. And so we talk a lot about how government doesn't do a good job for consumers, or trial lawyers don't do a good job, how they can do a better job. And then another part that we talk about is just the real everyday effects of kind of these government mandates. There's been, everyday people. I'll use one simple example, which is most of the things in your house probably feel like they are worse than they were 10 years ago. They cost more, they do a worse job, and there's fewer of the things you want in them. And that's weird, right? That's weird for regular people.
Absolutely.
Because, look, there's a lot of whatever the problems in our economy. Most of the time, companies are trying really hard to make something that you want. Sometimes, they're selling you things that you don't even need, but, you might want. And here is an example where you look around your house and you're like, that costs more, takes longer, does a crappier job. And the little dirty secret behind that is that starting, especially in the Obama administration, the federal government and the DC elites realized that they could just start taking away stuff from you and mandating that you live life a certain way. And they just started ratcheting that on all sorts of products. And so we spend a chunk of our time at Alliance for Consumers kind of trying to raise awareness of this, because people are all aware that things are kind of worse in their house. And it really affects you, but you might not have known that it was coming from DC.
Right. Okay. So and you said something interesting there, which is starting especially in the Obama administration. A lot of people will think back to Ralph Nader or to regulations that came about, decades in the past and sort of gradually started to change the relationship between, the let's say entrepreneurs or the capitalists that were selling goods and consumers who were buying goods. And in some ways that made a lot of sense. In other ways, for example, as we're taping this, the Supreme Court's about to hear oral arguments in a case that's testing Chevron deference, as administrative agencies have just grown sort of under our noses in ways that the average person could not possibly track or understand because it's absurd. I mean, even when you work on these issues, it takes attorneys like yourself, people at the Federalist Society, like they have to study this day in and day out for years to grasp fully what's happening here. So could you talk to us about the process? Like, how did this happen?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's, I really like that you flagged the Ralph Nader thing. There's a reasonable debate in the world on like product safety. Okay. I think very reasonable people on the right can disagree about and you got like libertarians and about how many safety features a car needs to have to be safe, or how many times something's allowed to blow up in your house before it should not be allowed to be sold, right? These are actually fine discussions, okay? And that's some of where a lot of existing government regulation talk was. Like Ralph Nader says, that car blows up, and somebody says, well, then it shouldn't be sold. And then there's a debate, right? Because those things can cause products to be more expensive, but arguably they are making them safer, and you're taking away consumers' choices. But I think in the safety zone, maybe we can have a discussion. What's crazy is in the Obama administration, the nerdy nerds in DC figured out that they could use stuff that had historically not been used as a weapon as much. Okay, I'm not going to say it's perfect, but they started thinking, well, we used to just give credits or tax incentives to buy a more efficient car or a more efficient dishwasher or a more efficient refrigerator. You've seen the Energy Star stuff on products, right? They decided that what they could start doing is saying, no.
When were the Energy Star?
That is a long running project that the Department of Energy does with the EPA. It's really funny if you talk to people in the administration, because each one wants to claim credit when they like what it does.
Oh,
that's an older product, but that's, I think, in a space where it's okay, if you want to identify for consumers what is energy efficient and put a green clover leaf on it or a little smiley face, and then that makes people want to buy it. Or even if you want to offer them $10 off as a consumer group, we're fine. If you live in a progressive enclave of San Francisco and that makes you feel good, fine, have at it, right? What the Obama people started doing is saying, hey, we could just start eliminating options for people to live differently than we want them to. We could start to say that you can't sell a dishwasher unless it meets really efficient standards. We could start saying that you can't sell cars unless they meet standards that are so efficient that only electric vehicles count. Do you get it? They just start imposing these mandates. Now, what's terrible from a consumer's perspective, and let me just add, they think it's very clever because the person who the mandate applies to are the people who make the product. Okay. It applies to Whirlpool or LG or Samsung. So they just have to stop making the stuff people want. And so the consumer goes into the store, and if they complain, the store just goes, well, that's all Samsung makes now. And maybe the consumer thinks that Samsung just hates them. I don't know. I'm picking Samsung because my friend just bought a Samsung refrigerator. Maybe Samsung just hates me. But really, the DC bureaucrats went to Samsung and said, you are not allowed to sell anybody a dishwasher that can do anything with more than a thimble of water and no heat. So surprise, the engineers at Samsung decided that the best they could do was a dishwasher that takes 2 hours and 43 minutes to run, and does an okay job and costs $1 bajillion. And the Obama people were all sitting there, golf clapping themselves. Oh, yes, yes, yes. Good job, good job, good job. Because what they had done is they had basically mandated that all sorts of people in Plano, Texas, or Lincoln, Nebraska, or Topeka, Kansas, have to buy something, which was the product that all of the elites in DC and San Francisco wanted for themselves. They're like, aha, I got so sick of trying to cajole everyday Americans into living like me. I just made it so that because of efficiency rules, they all have to buy the stuff I buy because they're not allowed to sell inefficient products because of, climate change and the environment and all sorts of other things. And so they really just started this relentless campaign. And I'll say they started it, right? It's not like they perfected it. And all of a sudden you started to realize that I don't know about you, but I used to live in this tenement apartment in Boston when I was in law school. That dishwasher ran for 45 minutes. It got everything blazing hot, scald your fingers. And it was great. And then we moved to Phoenix, Arizona and into a newer house that was not made in 1908. And the dishwasher was really fancy looking, but it takes almost 3 hours and it does an okay job if I'm really careful with it. That is the 100% the effect of the government tapping all the manufacturers on the shoulder and saying, walk with us, walk in line with us, or we're going to fine you, end your business, right? And going back to your point about corporate media, most industries, most of the time are okay, you're going to promise that everybody has to play by the same rules? Okay, I guess I don't care. Right? They'd like to sell something better, but if the government says, don't worry, no one's going to be able to sell a dishwasher that works, they're like, oh. So you have a lot less corporate pushback. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so that went across all sorts of products. And then what you saw with so what I think is so interesting is in the Trump administration, I worked at the state of Arizona and we worked closely with parts of the Trump administration on this. They took a pretty populist bent, which was, hey, why don't we just create a new category of dishwasher that could maybe and washing machine and some other things that could just do the job in an hour. Its sole criteria is it needs to run in an hour. And it's a whole different category. And that way, everyday people could just buy that. And if you want to buy a traditional 3-hour washing machine, go do that. And you'd be amazed. Consumers wrote in comments. The state of Arizona let a comment that kind of aggregated a bunch of these where everyday people were just thank you. I'm running my dishwasher twice. How is that more efficient? I'm putting 3 pods in my dishwasher. That's stupid. I'm hand washing my dishes, then using my dishwasher. How could the Obama administration think that that's more efficient, right? Just all sorts of things that I think were everyday common sense, which is how can it be more efficient to mandate that something doesn't work so then everyone uses it twice?
Yeah. It's crazy.
I think it's crazy. And everyday people think it's crazy. But the elites in DC were we figured it out. We figured out how to force people to only buy what we want them to buy. We'll just remove everything else from the market under efficiency standards. That you and I would have never thought efficiency standards are the key to unlock the door for progressive lifestyle choices to be mandated for everybody, right? But that's what they figured out.
Well, and the other thing, I was going to say, it's also interesting that these efficiency standards hamper quality in a way that consumers don't like, obviously, but you can't have both when you have these standards. There's no way to meet, and this is sort of a question. This is my understanding of the situation. Is there's absolutely no way for these companies to meet the standards, and also make products efficiently that are affordable for consumers, and then also hit those standards while performing really well. It just that seems like an untenable situation for the company. It's
like gravity. I mean, if you tell somebody make a really fast car, but you can spend when you constrain so many of the factors, say no water, no heat, they have to, they spend as much money as they can to get it as good as they can, but there's limits, right? You're messing with so many of the inputs that it makes it almost impossible. But I think what's really fascinating that none of the elites ever thought of, because I think think that maybe just not normal people. I think I'm allowed to say that on here.
Oh, please. Yes.
Because it didn't occur to them that people were going to just like run their dishwasher twice. So the whole premise of the rule was it's so much more efficient, you know, for the land and the water and, you know, Mother Gaia. But they were doing it in such an aggressive way that the obvious reaction of a family of 5 in Topeka, Kansas was run that dishwasher twice. It's the only way to make it work, which of course very clearly would undo the efficiency mandate, right? Like, and they hadn't factored that in. Because I don't think it occurred to them. Like maybe some families have more than like 1.2 children or live in places that aren't San Francisco. So anyway, so the Trump administration did all these good things, right? And I think what's really fascinating and why I think this is newsworthy is last week, news came out that in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals down in Texas, Judge Andy Oldham, a great American, wrote an opinion in Louisiana versus Department of Energy where, the first day of the Biden administration, one of the executive orders was he ordered the agencies to basically undo all of these Trump pro-consumer rules. Like, you cannot have those dishwashers that do anything in an hour or less, right? Like, how dare you? And there was a lawsuit. The state of Louisiana, one of my good friends, sued, and some of the arguments were really strong. There were things like, this isn't more efficient. And what happened is the Fifth Circuit said the Biden attempt to undo these good rules was flawed. And there was a lot of legal reasoning that is not that relevant. But I think what was really fascinating is a judge in Texas, Judge Oldham, just wrote things like, you didn't consider that people are going to run something twice. And that was pretty obvious from all the comments, but you didn't address that. Also, your mandate with regard to dishwashers is to make them more energy efficient. But most of your analysis talks about saving water. Well, the statute doesn't say you're allowed to think about water. And in fact, you know, what you should be doing is allowing them to use a lot more water, even if you constrain the energy efficiency. So you're thinking about it wrong. Your analysis is all wrong. And you're not considering how everyday people actually use these products, which means you've totally failed under classic administrative law. Like, imposing something without considering how people are going to use it is the height of absurd. And no, I'm undoing what you did. That's huge. That's huge because it is a, like, you will laugh. I think I laughed. Like, it took a federal judge in Texas to be like, you know, clapping like, idiots. People don't use these things like you think they do. They use them like a regular person does. Right. And he was like, and on that basis, you're idiots, and undid the Biden administration.
So this is from the Fifth Circuit on January 8th, mm-hmm. right? Like, this is very recent.
Yeah, very recent.
And what's the Biden administration pursuing? I imagine they've immediately signaled that they're pursuing in the opposite direction. They're going to keep fighting.
I don't know what they're going to do because the hardest. So this is where Judge Oldham did a classic, very clever thing, which is he not only said you failed to consider how everyday people are going to use them, but he said a lot of strong things about the statute where he goes, you can't just like ratchet down the water and say that that's on energy efficiency. Like, you know, it's like very nerdy, but he's like, some statutes say that you're allowed to consider water. This one doesn't. Why are you considering water? Seems like you didn't read it. Seems like you aren't trying to follow it. Seems like you don't get to count that as better, right? So that's going to hurt them, because the one thing that I didn't get to, because you got me all wound up, is in the last 2 or 3 months, the Biden administration, whatever we thought of the Obama administration, the Biden administration went it was like a royal rumble at the end of the year. They put out rules for refrigerators, freezers, dishwashers, ovens, cars, and furnaces, all at the end of the year. Initial proposals, and they're not done yet. And in almost every case, their proposals acknowledge that 80, 90, sometimes almost 100% of the products currently on the market would not meet the new standards, which, if you think about it in non-government speak, means Biden decided at the end of 2023 to announce that he was going to wipe away 80% or more of the cars on the market, the dishwashers, the refrigerators, the furnaces off of the market, and make all the manufacturers start making what he wanted them to make highly, even more efficient, even better this, even better that, and make this go to like the next level. And a lot of those, not every single one of them, but a lot of those are going to have to go back to square one because, the state of Tennessee had already called them out for a bunch of things, but now the Fifth Circuit has said, at least with a bunch of those, like, you're not actually even thinking about efficiency right, and you're not factoring in how people use these products. So, like, you're really, like, you're not doing this right. And that's going to cause the bureaucrats to go back to square one on a lot of this stuff, which, because it's an election year, could mean that, like, consumers were just saved. It all depends on how the next election goes.
You've seen the ads. Hassle-free weight loss drugs with no doctor visit. Sound too good to be true? It is. Med spas and telehealth brands are flooding the market to cash in with knockoff compounded versions. Don't be mistaken. They're not generics and they're not FDA approved. They can come from illegal foreign sources without the safety or quality assurances of the real thing. You're not getting the full story. Learn the facts at safemedicines.org. Paid for by Partnership for Safe Medicines.
America's fuel and petrochemical manufacturers help keep the U.S. economy moving. Matt, an engineer and CEO, explains why fuels like gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, and marine fuel are so important to our country and the world.
Fuel is the backbone of our country. It's what moves everything. To fly people across the country, to move ships, to plant and to harvest crops, and to really feed the world.
To learn more, visit WeMakeProgress.org.
And what is, obviously there's a ton of conversation about blueprints for a future Republican administration, whether it's another Trump administration or otherwise, specifically as it comes to the administrative state. And obviously, again, as we're recording this, Chevron is quite literally on the table at the Supreme Court right now. Is Chevron salient to this question? Are there major ways that we've seen Chevron deference contribute to the problem that you just really helpfully described? And B, what are, to the extent that you're aware, conservatives suggesting be done, right away again if the executive branch goes to Republicans in the future?
So Chevron deference plays into a lot of this. So the key with Chevron deference is that it really kicks in when a statute is not very clear. So what's interesting is in a lot of these spaces, the Biden and Obama administrations would say that the statute was super clear. It says increase energy efficiency, and therefore I'm increasing energy efficiency, right? They didn't actually ever say it was unclear. Sometimes you get Chevron deference. Chevron deference really plays in a lot of these where like they have to go find some like tiny statute that had never been read a certain way and like shove like a student loan bailout or something through it. Just like use like an imaginary hypothetical. But all of this plays down on what I think is so powerful is when people and the next administration should do this. And I know a lot of people worked in the last administration and they did do this, is when you, so I'll use this as the framing of consumer protection. For a long time, the conservative kind of corporatist model of consumer protection was don't sue people because companies are so important. And the liberal perspective was sue everybody, but keep all the money because we need to sue more people and the government needs the money, right? What we've really tried to do is insert like a different voice, which is like, you should just like fight for people and you should really focus on like doing consumer protection so that checks go to consumers. Well, similarly in the regulatory space, it's amazing. Judge Oldham didn't say super aggressive things in fighting over this dishwasher rule. What he said was like, almost he took on the language of the left, like, fine, you have to be efficient. Let's talk about how everyday people use stuff. If they have to use it twice, it's not efficient. So it's almost just like bringing common sense, non-DC thinking to these problems of like, okay, your mandate from the statute is to do efficiency. Let's make sure that we're only going to pass rules that are going to actually make people's lives better in the real world. So like one of the Biden administration rules is mandating fuel efficiency that's so high that everyone's going to have to buy an electric car. Well, we just saw that everybody's electric cars froze up like hockey pucks in Chicago because it got really cold. And
Giant
so,
hockey pucks.
Yeah, giant hockey pucks. Like what is local TV called it, like dead robots, just like a field of dead robots, which I thought was pretty funny. You know, a Judge Oldham-like approach to this would be like, is it actually more fuel efficient if nobody can buy a new gas car? So everybody who lives in rural Texas or rural America just keeps buying older and older used trucks, which are less efficient. Like if those stay on the road, are you really being more efficient when you mandate new cars, right? Basic questions about like, how does a reasonable person react? Because the liberal bureaucrats, just like if we ban all the gas cars, then everyone will just buy brand new, super expensive electric cars. And it's like, no, they won't. A bunch of people can't afford them. And a bunch of people live in rural parts of the country where they would rather be caught dead than have a car that they don't know where they can charge it, right? So even just like when you go into these boardrooms at the, you know, the EPA is in the Clinton building in DC, and you say things like, you have to actually factor in consumer choices. Why don't we do a consumer survey? Why don't we actually talk to consumers? Why don't we weigh consumer comments higher than random nonprofits backed by George Soros? Just little tweaks to be like, the whole point is to improve people's lives, not make their lives worse. And it's funny because like some chunk of these bureaucrats, they don't think they're making people's lives worse. And when you explain to them that they are, they're like, they feel kind of sheepish because they just were so fixated on efficiency. So to me, it's like, oh, I want to be very clear. And going back to your corporate media thing, the automakers, man, those guys, they all were talking like they thought that the new Biden administration rules would be okay. And then when the rules came out, they were supposed to announce them in Detroit, and all the automakers like freaked out. And they're just now realizing that the Biden administration just hates them.
Mm-hmm. And jobs are going to China.
Yeah, exactly. All the thing, like the little secret is the Biden administration, like most of the progressive staffing of the Biden administration just wants everyone to kind of have smaller houses, smaller cars, go less places, have fewer kids, eat less. You know, it's kind of dystopian in a bad way, rather than helping people live, you know, a slightly more efficient life in a way that isn't just like pain and suffering. And so I think it's important to constantly think about consumers, because in DC, there's so many interest groups. There's like the car makers, there's the, you know, this group, the National Association of Manufacturers, and they all have interests, but very rarely do they have the interests of consumers in mind. And so a lot of what we just talk about all the time is just everyday people care about basic things. They want the things in their house to work. They don't want them to blow up. Let's be very clear. But they also would just like them to work and not cost a gajillion dollars. And at the end of the day, you know, that's the most important thing. And if you keep that in mind, a lot of regulations get a lot easier to think about, because you're just thinking like, what's this going to do to an average person? And the answer is normally it's going to make their lives miserable.
I don't know if you saw that. Walter Kern wrote a super viral essay on this recently, on how nothing works. Like, he talked about his car, but he also talked about how he has things, you know, simple things that he's got at garage sales that were manufactured in like the 50s, that work so much better than something you get on Amazon. And I was actually just going to ask you kind of what you were talking about, potentially about the role of consolidation in all of this, lobbying in all of this. And I know that's kind of a huge issue, but I'm just kind of basically curious in the sort of Baptist and bootlegger dynamic, in that, you know, if you're talking about cars, for example, not a ton of competition anymore. I mean, there's a lot of consolidation in that industry, but I bet with dishwashers and other things, you know, in some cases, these corporations have acquiesced to the status quo, because they're full of, now we know, for example, who's investing in renewables at the highest rates. Like it's Exxon, partially because they're staffed by people who buy into all of this, and also partially because it hurts any potential competition and it hurts the small guys. To what extent is that dynamic present in what you're describing?
I mean, it's present in almost every aspect of what you're seeing with so the left's influence on corporate America has a lot of it come starting the Obama administration with, look at DEI, look at all this stuff. When the Obama people came out and started staffing up companies under the assumption that Hillary Clinton would be the next president, they were telling everyone, like, get ahead of it, right? Get ahead of the diversity mandates that are going to come out of the Civil Rights Division. Right. Get ahead on the green mandates. Yeah. Get ahead of everything. Just like get ahead, because she's going to come after you. And if you don't, and I can teach you how to get ahead because like I drew the map up to this point and she's going to keep drawing it, but I can get you there. Right. And then like, surprise, Hillary Clinton's not president. But I think what's crazy is this big little dynamic that you flagged is so present. Like, why do big oil companies not mind? And look, I think oil companies are great because more power for more people is just better. Like, life is better when you can heat your home. Life is better when you can air condition your home. It's just true. But they don't mind all sorts of limits on new drilling in America because they already have oil fields in like French Guiana, right? I mean, I'm like serious. Like they're drilling oil in Suriname, and I'm making some of these up, but not really. They're drilling oil in Suriname or Nigeria, and so sure, shut down American drilling. I don't care. I already got a big oil field off of Brazil or off of Angola or wherever, and they like these things because it helps them. So it's not that shocking. But I think what's also important is there are still divergences, and what I like about conservatives when we talk about consumer issues is we have the ability to remind people. I don't know. I think the EVs thing is just so big. I don't know how many stories do you have to see about Hertz selling their EVs. All of these promises and dreams of EVs has run into the reality. My friend always says this, and I hope maybe it's tied to something that will cause us to get canceled, but like the dogs just don't like the dog food, right? It's just that everyday people just don't really want EVs. They certainly don't want them now. So like 20% of America or 10%, probably 10% of America got really excited about EVs and they bought them and they drove them and they didn't care how much they cost. Tesla is like slashing the price of EVs. Ford's making EVs. No one wants them. I mean, how many times, have you ever followed, there's a great Twitter account called Car Dealership Guy. All of the pictures of, it's an anonymous account. It's so great. All of these Ford dealers outside like Kansas City. Because remember, the Ford dealers are like where people who buy F-150s, they're placed there, right? Like you don't have a lot of Tesla dealers in like rural Missouri. And they're like, yeah, I got all these like Ford Mustang Mach-E's. Nobody wants them. I would just really like to have more F-150s, but we can't make more of those. So I'm stuck with all these EVs and no one wants them. They're literally sitting in a lot over there. Nobody wants them. You're starting to see that more and more. We're like, at the end of the day, the companies are realizing that the consumers don't want what Biden is pushing.
And the F-150s cost more money and the EVs are subsidized.
Oh, I mean, have you, this is maybe, I should listen to your podcast more. My favorite is there was a line in the Ford annual statement, the 10K, like last year, where it described how their large duty vehicles, which is basically their truck, and maybe like a Ford Expedition. Like, I'm making up the number, but I'm off only by a little bit. They were responsible for like 114% of the net profit of the company. Yeah. Which basically means that all of the rest of the divisions lost a metric boatload of money. And so they had to make as much money as they could off of the trucks to pay for all the money losing on the other side of the business, right? Right. So when people are like, man, I can't believe a new Chevy Suburban. Yeah, so this is a great example. I can't believe a new Chevy Suburban costs like $80,000 because at least when I was a kid, like that was just a normal car. And it's like, well, when you explain to somebody like, well, every time you sell one of those, you have to sell 2 EVs to meet your fuel efficiency standards as a company, which means you better make a lot of money off of that Suburban because you're going to have to lose $5,000 on each of those, Chevy Bolts over there in order to be allowed by the government to sell this. Does that make sense? Like, that's the world that the Obama and Biden administrations have made, where they have to gouge you on their big cars in order to meet the efficiency standards so that the feds don't fine them into oblivion.
And then you just imagine how much more money they would lose if the EVs weren't subsidized and they were just trying to sell these on the, yeah.
Now, I want to be very clear that the scariest thing from a consumer perspective is there's two conclusions from what I just explained to you on dishwashers, on cars, right? Consumers don't want the cruddy products. So option one is manufacturers pray for the ability to sell you what you want. Option two is they're just like, so the only solution, Biden, is if you literally mandate that everybody buys electric vehicles, because if you don't mandate it, we can't make them do it. We keep cutting the price and they just don't want them. And then Biden's like, hold my beer. Like, I'm just going to ban gas powered cars.
Brilliant.
And then and then the car companies are like, well, that might do it. Right. Like if nothing else fails, we'll just ban it.
Right.
And so that's what I fear is like the negative sales of EVs is heartening because it shows that the consumer can still fight back, right? Like
barely.
They can still fight back against this. Yeah. And their voice is still heard, right? Every time Bloomberg or some big left-wing media company runs a story about how consumers don't like EVs, don't want them, won't buy them, they're losing money and people still don't want to buy them. Because let that sink in. Ford's losing their face on like a Chevy Bolt. And yet you still don't want it, even though you're getting it for $10,000 less than it costs them to make, right? Like, that's just an amazing reality. And so I feel heartened that like the consumers are punching so hard back that even Michael Bloomberg's news company is announcing that consumers just don't want the dog food.
You've seen the ads. Hassle-free weight loss drugs with no doctor visit. Sound too good to be true? It is. Med spas and telehealth brands are flooding the market to cash in with knockoff compounded versions. Don't be mistaken. They're not generics and they're not FDA approved. They can come from illegal foreign sources without the safety or quality assurances of the real thing. You're not getting the full story. Learn the facts at safemedicines.org. Paid for by Partnership for Safe Medicines.
America's fuel and petrochemical manufacturers help keep the U.S. economy moving. Matt, an engineer and CEO, explains why fuels like gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, and marine fuel are so important to our country and the world.
Fuel is the backbone of our country. It's what moves everything. To fly people across the country, to move ships, to plant and to harvest crops, and to really feed the world.
To learn more, visit wemakeprogress.org.
So I'm also curious about your experience as a Solicitor General, because, I'm thinking right now, this might seem like a little bit of a 180, but I think the connection makes sense too. And I'll flesh it out a little bit about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and the interesting tension that exists between the sort of Nader side of him and the side of him that was infuriated by, for example, a vaccine mandate that was justified and obviously overturned, but in this like obscure part of OSHA, like the act that established OSHA. So there's this, the Naderism is increasingly butting heads with the administrative state. And as Solicitor General, I imagine one of the interesting things kind of coming from a conservative perspective is that you are working with people in the government who might not necessarily be, the kind of dyed-in-the-wool conservatives, and you are responsive to a broad populace and all of that. So I guess I'm just curious for your thoughts as, there's more and more awareness kind of about the dystopian ends of the administrative state's goals on the left and the right, at least nationally. And then your experience, kind of on that state level of talking to people, just like having these conversations, thinking these things through, and just hearing people's responses to that.
So I would say the biggest thing is I did a lot of consumer protection cases in Arizona was it's everyday people, in my opinion, want government especially like your consumer protection division, they get the most excited about the small things. They want the government to help make sure that the local used car lot doesn't screw them over, or that if their warranty is not being honored and they write a letter to the government, that the government like responds and tries to help mediate the situation, which we did a lot in Arizona. Like there's this really rich guy who's apparently friends with a friend of mine. And they were like, oh, I got screwed over with this Jaguar dealership. Like, can you help me? Because I ran consumer protection. And they thought that I was being kind of glib when I said, just file the online consumer complaint form. And they were like, really? And then I heard from the guy like a month later, he goes, I filled out the form, and the team, which is non-college educated, like call center people, helped, and the warranty got honored. He was ecstatic.
Wow.
That's like government. That's what everyday people want. They want the DMV to work. They want consumer protection to like help them get their warranty honored. And they want a check out of a bad actor, like quickly. The way that, and it's amazing. If you tell bureaucrats that's the goal, man, they will do that, because it's like, we want to help people quickly with the things that are highly relevant to their everyday lives. If you direct them in that way, their do-gooder nature, at least here in Arizona, they're like, sounds great, let's go do that. And they think about how they can accomplish that. What you see with the left and a little bit of this like post-Nader, like new, the Obama style, is they actually do a terrible job with helping on the car warranty. And they do a terrible job of running the DMV. And they do a terrible job of getting you a check out of a bad actor within like a year, because they're so fixated on changing the world. They don't think like whatever, like Nader had both of these streaks, but like the way he talked was like, stop the car from blowing up. Now the way they talk is like, make everything the way I want it to be. And so I think that is just a fascinating dynamic, because when you're in government, if you focus on the little things, people are blown away that the government works for them. And when you get them at, we worked really hard to finish consumer cases like really fast, because people were so used to like 6 years. I saw this case the other day. Apparently I like to talk about Ford a lot. It was like this case that the states were bringing against Ford over like trucks for towing capacity. It took them 8 years, and they got something like $18 million spread over 50 states. And if you think about how much money that means per state and how many years they were spent, it's like comically stupid. But that's what people are used to. They're used to like hearing about a settlement over a product that nobody even remembers anymore, because the administrative state that the left envisions is changing America. And we should be focused. This goes back to the Trump administration. We should not be focused on like government not existing. We should just be focused on government working and looking down at tiny problems that affect everyday people, because there's a lot of them. They're overlooked constantly, and people are immensely grateful when the government helps with those things. They are far less interested in the government taking away their dishwashers than they are with the government like stopping some fly-by-night operation on Amazon from selling them something that poisons their kid. But you notice how like the Biden administration seems like not very focused on like drugs coming through the border, but they're like very focused on like EVs.
Right.
Like that's a great example of like when you just focus on the little things. I mean, little in the sense of like scale, not importance.
Right.
People don't want things to blow up. They want the things in their house to be safe, and they want scammers to stop scamming.
Right.
They're far less interested in using government power to reshape America in the image of like a San Francisco progressive.
That's so interesting. That's such an interesting perspective. O.H. Skinner, I just have to thank you so much for kind of walking us through all of this, because I'm always trying to wrap my head around it. And I think it's just the scope of what's happened over the course of the last couple decades. It is hard to just track. So just appreciate your perspective here.
Yeah. I mean, if you have another minute, I'll give you another great example of
please.
How conservatives do better. So like when you go into government, the first thing you ask is like, why are you here? And if people are like, I want the people that I represent, which is how they should think about it, to like have better lives. That's normally good. But like, let's use another example of like the environment, right? The Biden administration seems far less focused on like clean air and clean water and very focused on like greenhouse gas emissions and climate change, right? But what's fascinating is those aren't the same thing, right? Like clean air and clean water is about like stopping somebody from dumping something in a river or from like running a factory that's like literally putting out heavy metals. But climate change stuff, that actually like you don't see carbon in the air, you don't like carbon dioxide in the air. Like you don't see it. It's not affecting your clean air, your clean water. It's like some sort of a global phenomenon, right? Like the air you breathe and the water you're drinking, those are American problems. Climate change is like a global thing, right? And yet the Biden administration and the EPA and all those people currently are entirely seemingly focused on climate change and not so focused on like clean air and clean water, which goes back to like most people just care about clean air and clean water. They don't want to look like China. They don't want the air to be like so visible that you can't even see your friend across your yard. And that's what they care about. So I just think every time we take over an agency, we should think about how does an everyday person interact with this agency and how can we focus on the little things that are in their way? You know, how can we focus on those kinds of things? Because that to me is just the biggest difference between conservatives running government. And I mean actual conservatives, because there was these jokes that were always made about the Bush administration was that it was driving the car in the same direction as the Clinton administration, just in a lower gear.
Perfect joke.
But like focus on little things. So I'll use another example. When I was going around talking to my Solicitor General colleagues back many years ago, when we first started this dishwasher issue, a couple of them were like, my boss is going to get laughed at because this is too small ball of an issue. And I retorted with, no, this might be the only thing people in your state know about your boss when he does it. Now we fast forward and it's getting a lot of attention because it is true that most people aren't consuming news about government 24 hours a day, but they're very aware of what's happening in their daily lives, right? They're very aware that the cars will cost more, that the dishwasher costs more. Those are the issues. And so I just think that is the biggest difference between conservatives and liberals. And it's something that I think is how we should think about the next federal administration. And it's a way to turn the administrative state because you can't go in. I mean, I have all the respect in the world for like Mick Mulvaney and these people, but you can't go into the CFPB and just basically ask them to go and like drink hemlock, right?
No, you can't. Nor should you, but you can't.
Right. But like, if you have some sort of a legal argument for ending an agency, like I'll be the first one to sign up normally.
Right.
At the federal
Maybe
level.
not
at the federal
hemlock.
level.
The hemlock is dubious legal.
Yeah, dubious legal. But what I really mean is when you go into an agency and tell them, I don't think you should exist and therefore none of you should really be here, that doesn't work. But when you go into like a consumer protection group and you say, I care about consumers, I care about everyday people, I care about scammers, let's go and focus on fly-by-night people selling stuff on Amazon, people who are stealing products from stores and then repackaging it and selling like spoiled baby formula. We should focus on the people who are like scamming old people out of their retirement savings by promising to build them websites that we're never going to sell anything. I mean, these are all real things that I dealt with. Let's go focus on those things. Now, some of the staff are going to be like, well, I didn't sign up here to like fight like scammers. And you're like, cool, that's fine. You can leave. But like the rest of us are going to go and fight scammers. You'd be amazed. Like you start to split the administrative staff because a whole chunk of them are really there to help people. And then there's a chunk of them that are there to like remake the world in, you know, Elizabeth Warren's image. And you can use the first group to help people, but you got to tell them where to go. And where they should go is normally, let's work on making dishwashers better for people. Let's go and stop scammers. And that smaller stuff, I mean, or at least the more like the more like domestic aspects, you can get those people marching in your direction because you've convinced them that you care about people and that you want them to help people. And that's the goal, like in every federal agency should be that, because you can split these staff. Look, a chunk of them are on like Club Fed and they're working from home and they're not going to do any work anyway. But like, frankly, that's a separate problem because that also means they're not making Biden's life any easier. But like a chunk of them you can get to help you because you just convince them that you actually want to do something.
Club Fed. So good.
That's a literal thing. Have you never heard that before?
No, I haven't heard it before, and I'm ashamed because I've lived in DC forever, and it's just the Club Fed island, basically.
Yeah, no, it's like they're on Club Fed. There's secretaries in these agencies that are on 100% permanent work from home.
Oh my gosh.
A bunch of these people, I'm not the best at this because my friends all worked in the Trump administration know best, but some of them are allowed to flex their time, which means they only work 4 days a week, 10-hour days. And then they're allowed to work from home 2 of those days. And then there's so basically they just refer to it as Club Fed. Some of them, their job is to be a secretary, but they only work from home. And then some of them only come to the office 2 days a month because when you add up the flex time and the this time and the work from home allowance, and they just call it Club Fed. They're here, but they're not really here because they're literally at home doing whatever. And we don't even know what they're doing.
Yeah. And I know when you talk to people in DC that are kind of outside the conservative bubble, it's amazing how many of them, I talked to a guy, I'm not making this up. I mean, he was inebriated, to be fair, but he worked for a federal agency and was telling us, all about how he travels the world and can wink work everywhere or anywhere, and is just astounding.
Club Fed. There you go.
Fed. Look, quite literally Club Fed in that case. OH Skinner is the executive director of the Alliance for Consumers, and you can go to allianceforconsumers.org to find more about their work. Thank you so much for joining us. Really, really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, and may Chevron's days be numbered.
Yes, amen. You've been listening to another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. I'm Emily Jashinsky, culture editor here at the Federalist. We will be back soon with more. Until then, be lovers of freedom and anxious for the fray.
America's fuel and petrochemical manufacturers help keep the U.S. economy moving. Matt, an engineer and CEO, explains why fuels like gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, and marine fuel are so important to our country and the world.
Fuel is the backbone of our country. It's what moves everything. To fly people across the country, to move ships, to plant and to harvest crops, and to really feed the world.
To learn more, visit WeMakeProgress.org.